Hello. So my name is Daniel. What is your name?
Tom.
Tom. Nice to meet you, Tom. So I've just finished spending the last 2 hours writing up and then speaking a debate judgment on their tournament they just had. So I haven't really prepared any opening statement here, but okay. I will just say off the top of my head a couple of things that I see with the question of the Christian God. So the main thing would be my issue is this idea of an omnipotent, omniscient, infinite, all-knowing, all-loving, perfect God. I don't really question the idea that there could be a creator. I think that's entirely possible. But my question is with the Christian God specifically. And the main focus that I think would cause a problem there would be this idea of omniscience, that this infinite being who has omniscience can see all that is current, all that is future, all that is past. But this leads to quite a few problems. Because let me see if I can pull this up even. But if someone can see the future, why would you do something that would be problematic to you and to your creation if you knew in advance that that was exactly what was going to happen? So, for instance, why would this infinite creator have created Lucifer when he knew that Lucifer was going to fight him, steal a third of his angels, and tempt his creation for all of time? Why would you do that? Why, when you have the option between creating Lucifer or creating Sally the angel, who will bring peace and happiness all over the world, why would you create Lucifer? That's just a bad sense of design, which does not lend itself to this idea of this. It would mean that either God was not omniscient, or he was not just, or he was not perfect. More than that, why would this creator put the forbidden fruit in the garden when Adam and Eve are going to eat of this fruit, and he knows in advance that they're going to eat of this fruit? Why would you put it there when you know that's exactly what's going to happen? That would be like creating a sentient robot. So it's just like humans, I guess. Creating a sentient robot, but putting a kill switch on this robot, and the kill switch says, "Don't touch me." But you don't create the robot enough to know that, oh, hey, touching buttons is not something we're supposed to do. So the robot, of course, is going to eventually touch this button. And when he does, it will kill 50 million humans. Why would you put that kill switch there in the first place? Why wouldn't you make your robot better so that he wouldn't touch that kill switch? Why would God put this forbidden fruit in the garden when he knows exactly what's going to happen? It doesn't make sense. More than that, why would God create humans who he knows in advance will suffer everlasting torture? That is a clear contradiction. If he is supposedly all just, why would he create them when he knows in advance that they are going to suffer in eternity for all of time? Jesus said to Judas that the one who dips his fingers into the bowl, it would be better if he had never been born, which is a little bit of a strange statement to make because Jesus is God who made Judas. Why not just not make Judas? Why not make the people who are going to go to hell? So this is my overall problem, and I'll have more. I'll have to pull up my notes and everything, but it's just this, the contradictions within this idea of an omniscient, infinite, perfect being. It is a contradiction, and there could be explanations to it, but that still means that there would be a contradiction there in the first place. What do you think?
Okay, fair enough. So just looking at the title of the debate, contradictions to the idea of the Christian God. Mm-hmm. That throws a huge scope over the different possibilities that we can go into, mm-hmm. right? All the religions that don't recognize the Christian God are contradictions to, the Christian God. The and so, or and it doesn't even, and you don't even have to go to other religions to look for that. Things that you yourself may come up with, or thoughts, or for example, the list of questions that you just went over. Those aren't the first time those questions have been answered. This isn't the first time this has been debated about, but someone came up with those ideas, and sure, they do have an appearance of contradiction. there's things that people just come up with in their own minds, out of their own imaginations, that are contradictions to the idea of the Christian God. And so so just to narrow it down a little bit, which I think we're going to be on the same page here, we're trying to figure out logical contradictions to the idea of the Christian God. And I think you just gave me a list of a lot of good questions of seeming contradictions, and I'm going to attempt to answer a few of those. And ones that I don't answer, because there were a few there, I don't know if I got them all down, but if you bring them back up, because I'd be interested in knowing if I missed any. So anyway, just contradiction. What is a contradiction? I was looking up a few definitions and found a few good ones that maybe we would agree with. But logical incongruity, or a situation in which inherent factors, actions, or propositions are inconsistent or contrary. And so things that are claimed about the Christian God, but in actuality, or maybe by experience or perception, things that are contrary or perhaps seem contrary. And that's going to be an important distinction, whether something is contrary or just seems contrary. Being a superficial contradiction, which can maybe be explained through proper context or a better perspective. One definition I really like, which is probably the simplest of them all, is just to be in conflict with. And so the question is that I want to approach, that my approach is there ideas that are in conflict with the Christian God? And so I guess what I'm looking for is, from your part, is like where the source of these ideas, and it sounds like those are kind of just logical things that we're perceiving in reality and perceiving in the human experience and trying to figure out, and you're asking, but that kind of contradicts from these things I've heard about the Christian God, or I don't know how much you've studied the Bible to compare those things with. But I would say if you're starting with sources outside of the Bible, you're gonna have to demonstrate or show that those sources are more credible than the Bible. Why the Bible? Well, that's because where we get all the sound doctrine and theology for who Christians believe that the Christian God is. And if you go with the Bible, then you're gonna show a true contradiction, you have to demonstrate that it's going to be a superior hermeneutic. Hermeneutic is just interpretation of the Bible than, say, the traditional hermeneutics and theologies. So just going into it, and I see, so this is like my second official debate, and so the clock is running. So we just kind of pass it back and forth informally. Is that how it works?
I created this one. It's 45 minutes, and we can just talk as much as we want. There's no 3-minute time limit in this one, so you go ahead and talk as long as you need.
All right, sounds good. All right, so let's just start. Yeah, so starting with all that opening statement, that's kind of long-winded, but let's talk about some of these questions that you asked. And some of them are questions that I've asked before. I want to start by addressing, why would Lucifer be created? And that kind of, and when you say, like, why was Lucifer created? Ultimately, the question is, why would God create a being that he knows is going to rebel against him, which is Lucifer, along with the third of the angels, like you stated. So you obviously know something about the Bible, because that's where it pulls from, but also the millions, if not billions, of beings, of human beings that will also fall in that way, and therefore, leading to what I think is one of the most controversial concepts of everlasting torture, eternal destruction at the end of judgment. So just to take a stab at, why would he create Lucifer? Why would he create these beings that would have the possibility of rebellion and would in fact choose to rebel against him? And I think the answer is that if he's going to create if his intention is to create an independent being, then it's going to be the possibility of rebellion is part and parcel to that sentient being. And so it talks about, the Bible talks about Lucifer or Satan being created as one of the top tier angels. He was, one of the prime works of God's craftsmanship. And so why would he create some? Well, he created all sorts of, according to, angel theory, which I'm not too well versed on, but there's, several different circles and tiers of angels and spiritual beings. And each one of them is I don't want to overstate. So part of this is maybe overextending my philosophy into what angels are, but what each one of them are independent, self-sufficient beings with their own authority and their own ability to choose what they're going to do. The same way that humans have been vested with this sovereign authority of our own choice, of our own what we would call free will, and so it's part and parcel to the nature of the beings that he created, that we would have our own choices, that we would be able to make our own choices, whether for good or evil. Now, why would he allow that, knowing that's going to happen? Well, one, I think because all people, some are going to choose to do evil. Many are going to choose to do good, or to walk in line with the order that he has established in this universe, in this planet. And when we look at the full scope of the Bible, Revelation, that evil eventually terminates and comes to an end. The devil and those that rebelled with him, their time is running out. The sands are in the hourglass, and each day that goes by, it's closer to the end. They will have their end in the lake of fire, which Revelation says, and along with those that have chosen to abuse, misuse, and also rebel from the Creator of life. And so I spent a lot of time on that question. I want to turn it back over to you. Maybe we can. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and then maybe some other. What other question you would like to go into? I do want to talk about everlasting torment as well, but I don't want to get too deep into starting multiple prongs of thoughts here. Sure.
Yeah. So the first thing, you went into a couple of definitions, and I really liked your one about to be in conflict with. I thought that was a good definition. So when I ask this question, I don't mean are there people who contradict the idea of the Christian God. I mean, obviously there are, but I just mean to the definition of the Christian God, this idea of a perfect, infinite, omniscient, omnipotent being. Is that inherently contradictory? Or do those ideas contradict themselves? To be in conflict with? Is there conflict within those things? And I would say that yes, that those do seem to be in conflict. You asked the question, how much have I studied the Bible? Actually, I was a former Christian. I was Catholic or fundamentalist Protestant for 22 years. Went to really far right Catholic school, wrote all my papers about how to defend Christianity. So I do know the Bible. And before I was willing to call myself agnostic, what ended up happening was I read the Quran. And I was like, this is not convincing. Why would anyone read this and go, oh, this makes me want to be a Muslim? And then I asked myself, wait, okay, well, why am I reading that objectively? And then asking the question, how does this convince me, when I don't read the Bible that way? I read the Bible and go, wow, this reinforces everything that I know is true. So what I did was I went back and I read the New Testament. Just read it twice. I just tried to read it objectively without bias. And I was like, wow, there's so many things here where if I did not already believe it, I wouldn't be convinced by it. And then especially when I read the New Testament again, the Old Testament, and there are just so many points in the Old Testament. The vast majority of the Old Testament is the Jews saying, God told us to wipe out this whole race of people. And that, to me, again, seems like a contradiction. There are entire books of the Bible, almost all of Joshua, almost all of 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. The vast majority of the Old Testament is genocide. And Sure, I suppose it is possible that God actually ordered these things, but the more likely answer to this, to my mind, would be that these were human people who did exactly what all other humans at the time were doing. They killed each other and then said their God made them do it. But really, their God never said anything of the sort. Really, it was just their human minds, and they were attaching God to it. Now, to come back to my overall, the things that I had mentioned at the very beginning, you had the point about independence would equal rebellion, which I think is a good point, that if you're going to create an independent being, that means that independent being would have the right to rebel. Otherwise, it's not actually independent. I think this is a good point. And there was another thing that you said, which I'm just going to give you an argument here because I'd never thought of it before, but prime works of God's creation. You talked about how Lucifer was one of the prime works of God's creation. And that made me wonder, does the better God creates something, does that mean the more likely they will rebel? I wonder about that. I'd never thought of this before, but that might be the case, which would suggest a reason for why God made a flawed world. That the better he makes the world, the more they rebel. Which would be and the thing is, as a human, I can't answer this because I'm finite, so I don't know the answer to why an infinite being would do such things. But it's entirely possible that the reason he would make flaws would be because the better he makes them, the more they fail, the more they rebel. And that only in creating failed things can it work. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But I mean, that's a possible interpretation. Anyway, that's not even helping my side here. But it was just something I was thinking about. But to the question of independence, rebellion, and then free will, my answer would be the rules of the universe. And what you see in this world is that we need free will and that we need independence in order to be able to rebel. Right? That's what we see. That's what we observe in this current world.
Yeah.
But the only reason that we see that is because that's what the rules of this world say. We can't picture an alternative to that because that's the way this world is. But who created this world? If it was God, God created this world and he created the rules of this world. So he very easily could have just made different rules. So the whole idea that we need independence, that we need to be able to rebel in order to have independence, or this whole idea that we need free will, and this whole idea that we need evil in order to be able to choose love, that's only because of the way this world is set up. But in order to say that, you would have to say God is not strong enough to have made a better world. Why could God not have made a world where we can all freely choose love without needing hell, without needing original sin, without needing evil or any of these things? Why could he not have created this world without needing Lucifer, without needing original sin, etc., etc.?
Okay. Good question. The last question is the one most freshest in my mind, so I want to speak to that this is a world where we can freely choose love, and it is. I don't quite understand how it's not. We have, if you of course, some people and even Christians are, cling to their salvation, maybe perhaps out of fear. Now, my experience and the many I've interacted with, this isn't I feel like it's a overpopulated caricature of Christians just fearing and hoping for heaven and hoping to get out of hell, so they believe. That's I feel is a short-sighted caricature of what Christianity is, and most of the Christians that I've encountered and experienced.
Let me butt in here and just rephrase what I mean by this. Okay,
okay.
I'm not saying that we can't freely choose love. I'm sure we can freely choose love. Everybody can choose love. That's one of the things about this world. But my point here is that in this world, we either choose love or at threat of evil, or at threat of rebellion, at threat of hell, right? Like your response to my point was that we need to be able to have rebellion. We need to be able to have free will as part of our independence. And my answer to that was that's only because of the way the rules of this universe make it.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I think that helps with clarification. Let me let me know if you feel like I'm talking past you, but I want to speak to like the different rules, right? So sure, there's certain rules of the way that the universe works, and there's certain and God has given certain moral rules of a certain moral order and a design of how we're supposed to live and carry ourselves about on this earth. Towards our own personal conduct, our interpersonal conduct, and how we're supposed to regard God. And the all those rules, they go back to the two main things when someone came and asked Jesus, what are the two main commandments, right? The Old Testament, by the way, is full of hundreds of different commandments. It's not just we have the 10 big ones, but there's a ton of rules in there, but ceremonial and moral. But we get to Jesus, who says that the top two ones are simply love God with all your mind, heart, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so there's those are kind of what the rules are geared toward. But the rules also stem from God's purpose on what He was intending for the earth and human beings to be and exemplify. And what is that purpose? Well, simply put, is to be an extension or manifestation of His glory. And that's a glory that flies, or that goes forth under the banner of love. And so when you talk about God's omniscience and omnipotence, and I think those are interesting thought exercises, but the ultimate reality of who God claims to be, we see it in which is backed up by 1 John, verse in 1 John 4:8. He that loves not does not know God, for God is love. And that is the ultimate kind of identity and persona and reality of what God is and what He expects from His creation, from the people that He has created. And so what are the rules? So what are the rules established for? Well, the rules are established as guidelines to help orient us toward fulfilling that ultimate purpose, to become beings that are more capable, have a deeper capacity to love and to love well, and to develop on that track. I kind of want to talk about forbidden fruit real quick, but do you have any responses to what I was just?
Yeah, I'll go into my response later. You go ahead and talk about the forbidden fruit.
Okay, so forbidden fruit. Why would God put forbidden fruit, in the garden in the first place, as some kind of temptation? Well, I don't necessarily think it was forbidden fruit because He told them, don't eat of that tree. Now, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have been able to eat of it in the future. Perhaps what I believe, or tend to believe, is that they weren't ready to eat of it and to experience the fruit of it. They weren't ready. And so for example, there's things that we're not going to expose a child to because they're just not mentally, emotionally ready for things like that, such as, there's a proper time to enter into talks about sexuality and that kind of behavior, and deeper kinds of corruption and evil that are in the world. There's knowledge that we want to protect them from until they are ready to handle it, so it doesn't create issues and confusion when they're at an age they don't understand. And so I kind of feel that this applies to the garden and the forbidden fruit, which was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that it was just something they weren't ready for it. So it's like, well, why would God put that there in the first place? I think that's a good question. I don't necessarily have a good answer for that, other than He gave them the simple command, and the unfallen man, knowing directly what God's intentions are, has the ball fully in his court of being able to decide and whether he's going to partake of it or not. And when both when Eve and took of it and ate of it and shared with Adam, it was actually, it talks about Eve being deceived and Adam biting into it willingly and knowingly that it was something that he shouldn't have done. He was soberly biting into it. Eve, it says, was deceived. I don't know if you want to get into the the particulars of that, but I think that's telling, because most people say, well, Christianity just lays the blame on women, but really the Bible, I think in Hebrews, says it's through one man sin entered the world, and so from Adam knowingly taking of it and his sin. So, but that's to the side. The forbidden fruit was not necessarily a temptation put there. All right, may have not even been a test, as much as this is something that they weren't ready for yet, and they could have been in the future. I don't know when that would have been, or what that would have looked like, but it's I think it's a fair possibility. I want to go into everlasting torture. What do you want to respond to the forbidden fruit, or?
Yeah, you go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring up a couple more arguments in a moment here. So you go ahead.
Sounds good. So let's talk about the everlasting torture situation. Now, most of what flies around out there is, and I'll admit a lot of Christians believe it, that it's an eternity in hell. And the Bible actually doesn't teach eternity in hell. Hell comes to a terminal point in right before the big judgment. It talks about hell being emptied out and people coming to, all the souls in hell come before the great judgment throne of God for the final judgment. So hell is pretty much emptied and it's thrown into the lake of fire and destroyed. And so hell has a terminal point. So if you ever think someone's in hell,
it's still an incredibly long amount of time in torture. Maybe it's not without an ending point, but it's still an incredibly long amount of time being tortured.
Okay, fair enough.
The point where Jesus said it would be better that they were never born.
Okay, yeah. And so that was and that's, yeah, he definitely did specifically say that about Judas. And however, if it's a few thousand years is better than a few billion, which is better than eternity. So that being said, I think Judas was still created as a much like the original Lucifer, who's created and chose to rebel. I mean, Judas has to bear responsibility for his choices. It's not, and then he's not the only one that it would have been better for him not to be born. There's people that are doing wicked things in this world. Even as we speak, we wouldn't be able to handle. For example, if we were to have downloaded in our mind all the evil happening within the past minute in this world, we would probably collapse and die of shock. But that being said, sure, that statement applies to Judas. No one wants to have on your eternal record, I betrayed the Messiah of humanity. That's a tough one to swallow. That being said, why would he be created anyway? Well, I think it goes to show that God's plan. What is the deeper plan? What is the deeper purpose? You can't, just because some people are going to choose to do wrong and abuse the great privilege of life and the spirit that we've been created with, doesn't mean that the rest of us should forego that privilege, because we are going to do what's right. We are going to choose to conform to the will of God. And so everlasting torture and hell. So hell is just kind of a quick remedy, because we come before the great throne, and then it talks about those not written in the book of life being tossed in the lake of fire. And I just want to be honest. I don't know if it's a conclusive, if we can say conclusively that it is eternal torture. There's a sect of, I don't know, sect. There's a school of thought called annihilationism, where you're thrown into the lake of fire and you cease to be. And there's verses that back that up, which I think harmonize a little better with, God is judge and just, and that what good does souls in eternal torture really do for the, for the heaven after all evil has ceased. What good is that to have souls just on an endless rotisserie in this lake of fire?
Yeah.
So
there's multitude of different passages, specifically from the words of Jesus, like weeping and gnashing of teeth, that suggests that there is this actual physical pain that is going on in hell. We don't know exactly because we're not infinite. We are finite beings, and we haven't been to the infinite, so we can't know. But based on what is in the scriptures, it would certainly be more suggested than not that there is going to be physical pain.
Oh, yeah.
The thing that I think has to be made just as a starting point, faith is not a default. We don't start with faith. We have to choose faith one way or the other. So before we choose faith, there must be some level of basis for us to say, yes, I believe. So
yes.
I would call this basis the question of reasonable degree of certainty. I don't think that we need to know something with 100% certainty, but we should be able to have a variable level of proof. So at least a reasonable degree of certainty before we say, yes, I believe. So when I create a proposition, contradictions to the idea of the Christian God, it's the question of, before we say I believe, we need to say, are there too many contradictions that prevent me from saying I believe? Now, you talk about the idea that maybe Adam and Eve weren't ready for the fruit, but you still didn't really have an answer for why it would have been put there in the first place. And the fact that it was put there is what ultimately led to original sin, which has caused the downfall of humanity, the fallen nature of humanity, when it didn't even need to be put there in the first place. There's no reason for this creator, because we're asking the question, why would the creator, this idea of the Christian God, that he is perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, all of these things, then we ask the question, if that God actually existed, would the world have turned out the way we see it? So this is where we come into the question. I like to call this unintelligent design, because obviously the argument that many Christians make is that if intelligent design is a proof for the creation of the world by this creator, right? But actually, if you look at this world, it does not add up to the idea of that it was created by this perfect, omniscient being. The thing that I like to point to here, and it's sort of a strange argument, but bear with me for a moment. Why do women have periods? That's such an idiotic and terrible way of designing this, because anyone who is designing this wanted to ask the question, how do we let women know once a month they are not pregnant? Any of us would know probably the worst way you could do that is to have them shoot blood out of their vagina once every month. That's just stupid. That's not intelligent design. That does not add up to this idea of this perfect, all-loving, omniscient being. That suggests that it was much more likely that the creator, if there is one, there's a creator, let's say there's a creator, it would suggest that that creator either was not omniscient, or perhaps that they were screwing with us. They're just messing with us, which I think there's a lot of evidence. If you look at the world objectively, it seems quite possible that the creator of this universe has us as his toys. We're just here to make him, and he laughs at all the stupid things we do. There's just as much evidence of that as there would be of the Christian God, maybe more, when you look at the flaws in that. There's not this evidence of this perfect being who clearly loves us in all this way. And then the last thing that I want to say, when you talk about hell, and this idea that there could be an ending point, just because there's an ending point doesn't prevent the fact that there's still an incredible amount of pain at some point or another, that God had the choice to create these people or not. If he is truly omniscient, that he knows exactly what's going to happen, and he knows, as Jesus himself said, that it'd be better for them not to have been born, then the only reason he would create them would be, actually, I don't even know. He himself has said it's better that they not be born. I can't answer that. I don't think anyone can answer that. If God himself says, don't create them, but God himself created them, then that says that God has failed.
Now, Judas would have heard, Judas obviously would have heard Jesus speak those words. So don't you think that Judas had a fair chance on whether he was going to betray Jesus from that point to the time he did?
I'm sure he did, but God already knew what exactly was going to happen.
Yeah, but he could have just as well chosen to. I mean, he didn't necessarily have to even stay as a disciple. He could just like, you know what, I'm going to resign. I'm going back to fishing or whatever he did before, right? He could have just completely bowed out. But
But this is where you're talking about the rules of this universe, this whole idea of free will. That okay, yeah, well, he had the free will to choose this, but you're missing my deeper point on that, which is the only reason that we need this hell, that we need this evil, that we need suffering, is supposedly because that's necessary in order to make love the other choice, right?
oh, I would disagree. I would disagree. I don't necessarily think that
Okay.
we need hell. Yeah, we don't need hell to elaborate how or to underscore how good heaven and love is going to be. I think hell is just it's I think it's actually the ultimate show of man's pride and rebellion to say that okay, you can't really get much of a worse, punishment in your imagination than the idea of eternal torture. Let's say even if we were going to grant, okay, there's eternal torture going on here in the lake of fire. It's the epitome of pain, amplified to infinity. All that does is highlight the pride of man to say that, okay, even if I believe that is my fate, I'm going to choose to do what I want anyway and go into hell for eternity just to do my will because I don't want to bend to the God that made me. Now, I do think that's kind of a narrow sliver of it, but I do think that's one thing that hell shows.
Let me quickly follow up on that then. There's a couple issues I would have there. The first would be that according to that, you're saying we don't need hell. So why then does hell exist? There's no reason for it to exist. And the second thing would be that you're assuming that this proves that, oh, hey, this means that humanity is choosing all these terrible things. What about me? I'm focusing on this. I'm clearly trying to come to these answers, and yet I am not deliberately choosing something evil. I'm deliberately choosing something that I believe is true.
Fair enough. I'm assuming there's not like on the other side of the screen, there's a whole wall of torture items and
Yeah.
you got people chained up out there. You seem like a decent guy. Nice colored shirt there. But here's what I'm getting at. You don't need hell to highlight how good love is. Hell has its purpose. I think hell is a place of punishment and a place of the ultimate destiny for those who want nothing to do with God. So you get turned over to the fires of hell, and I think a lot of that's metaphorical, but ultimately it's not where you want to end up. I think we could all agree on that. So you don't need hell for love to prevail or for love to be as good as it is. What defines that is God's presence itself. And so hell is just for those that don't want to be in God's presence, and that they're as punishment for turning against Him and abusing the image of God that we were all created in. So I want to make a quick point on the design, the unintelligent design, and specifically the idea of the period, which is interesting that you bring that up. But if you look at the way that nature runs, it runs in cycles. And especially if you look at the way that we tend to behave in nature and the way that human depravity, manifests itself in this world, there's a good thing there. These cycles provide a good check and balance into the things that we do or would do. For example, back in the days, even now, where with slavery and sex trafficking, continuing to happen, but the cycles of sleep are just an inhibitor of more evil being done. If you have a slave, they have to sleep at some point. And so it prevents, and you can look at that as a little check and balance in the kind of human corruption scheme. With women having a week-long period out of the month, it gives a good encouragement or discouragement from sexual activity to have time to rest and break in that cycle. And I think that's actually you could see that as a benefit. I'm sure there's there may be some other benefits that come from that, but it gives a rest to the woman of perhaps men that would just take more advantage of that. Now, if original sin never happened, how would that look like in an unfallen world? I don't know. But just to say that because you think you have a better idea, that your perspective is more intelligent than the way that things were created, I just think that's just a huge overextension into assuming that of what things could or should be like. That's you don't really have a credible platform to stand on. And a lot of times when we think that we're making these correct connections, they turn out to be wrong. For example, when we were learning more about how DNA works, people were like, oh, well, it looks like 90% of DNA is just junk. It doesn't code for anything. It's useless. So it's good reason or basis for evolution of just all these, all this junk DNA just kind of accumulated over all these ages. Well, guess what? The science, which stated that, which used to be a scientific fact, has now rolled back on itself because they're recognizing that DNA is even more complex than what we originally thought, and that junk DNA, in fact, is not junk, but has certain purposes, and we haven't even got to the bottom of all that it does or is. And so we need to be careful, I think, in ascribing to the creator or a possible creator over what was poorly thought out, or what our ideas or the superiority of what we think our ideas represent. The final point I just want to leave you, and it's been a good discussion. I wish we had more time, but you talked about reasonable certainty, and that how we do come into this world with a default ignorance, and we don't know. And I think by default, I think we are agnostic. We just don't know. There's so much possibility out there, and and I can speak from my own experience, but I'll also speak to what the Bible challenges every man and woman with, is that, yeah, we don't know, but we don't have to settle for simply a blind faith or steps or a blind faith platform of hoping that I'm choosing the right religion. So Old Testament and New Testament alike have a constant theme of seeking and finding. It's a call and an invitation and a call to seek, and a guarantee backing that up that you will find. So Jeremiah 29:13 talks about seeking with all your heart. And let's see, it's God speaking to the prophet, says, you will seek me and find me when you seek for me with all your heart. And then Jesus himself says, seek and find, ask and it will be given, and knock and the door will be opened. And so the great error of humanity is not petitioning the God of the universe, whoever that may be, to petition with a sober mind and an open heart to say, I want to know what the truth is. Help me know beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond all these other claims, beyond my ideas, beyond my confusion. And if the Bible is true, and if he is a good God, and a God that desires for you to know the truth, then he will make it known. It will be known. And that's something that, I can back up with my own experience. I've been a Christian for 13 years. At the age of 22, I was an agnostic up to that point. But it's simply what the Bible says. We don't have to settle for just blind faith. God seeks people that are.
But that is what I did. I mean, that's what I do know. I'm not going to act like I know all the Bible. I don't. But I have clearly attempted to answer these questions, and I am seeking and finding, and it's actually that seeking that led me to have the opposite conclusion, which is fine. That's why we have these sorts of discussions and everything. But I think that if the default position is ignorance, and then we need to have some level of proof, then we ask these questions, or do these contradictions exist? And I think they do clearly exist. There might be answers to them. There might be possibilities that the infinite being would know that we finite beings can't comprehend, but that doesn't mean that there aren't the contradictions in the first place. And so let's just talk about some of those contradictions. Your response to the whole idea of periods is that nature runs in cycles. Yeah, but nature doesn't necessarily require that the cycle has blood. Why exactly? Why would a period work this way? Why can't once a month women have a random blinking? and then they know they're not pregnant.
Well, what do you want? You want jelly beans to come out of there instead of blood? I mean, it's
better than blood.
It would be, but like I said, it does give a temporary.
I guarantee you, if you ask any woman, if the option is between jelly beans coming out of their vagina or blood, I think we have a pretty clear option.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sure the survey would be more toward your favor than mine.
But yeah, good talking with you.